Welcome back to video number 3 on our series where we are creating a user form that will allow us to execute SQL queries from Excel and then display the results of that query inside a user form. So basically, we're adding this little guy right here. So in our previous video, we kind of did the aesthetic component. So we laid everything out, gave things names, and kind of went through some documentation, and we basically started writing the code for our little button down here called execute query. And we didn't do anything super fancy. We just declared a bunch of object variables. So picking up where we left off, what we're going to do now is keep going on in this process. The first thing that we got to understand is with our user form, it's assumed that our user has inputted some information. So what we're going to do is grab that information and then start manipulating it inside our code. So we're going to grab some information first. So first thing is grab the query text box. To be completely honest, there's things about this that is not necessarily done correctly, but we're going to keep it simple at this point. There's a lot of checks that you have to take in mind when you're building a user form, like what happens if they haven't written a query? Should you display an error? You have to really think through this stuff. I'm not going into that kind of detail at this point because, again, I just want to get us comfortable with building the functionality. At a certain point, again, if people are interested, we can go through that process of like, okay, how do you make your code more robust and work in a more consistent fashion? But just keep that in mind. There's a lot of assumptions I'm making when I'm writing this code. Like, I'm assuming it's never going to be blank, right? So just keep that in mind. So next one that we're going to do is our server text box. The me keyword refers to the user form itself, and you can then go into the controls collection, use the item method, and then we use the name of the control to basically access it from that collection. So in this case, I want the server text box. We'll just grab the text box fields. We'll just make it a little bit more generic. The code that I'll put on GitHub is a little bit more detailed, but that's okay. So next one is database text box. This again will be me.controls.item. And then it's going to be database text box. Pretty cool, right? Nothing too complicated. All right. So there's that. What we're going to do after that is we're going to grab the list view. So grab the list view. So we're going to set our query results equal to me.controls.item and then query results. So this is where our data is going to be stored once it's ideally been queried, right? So now that we've kind of defined some of our components, let's grab their value. So the value that is technically at this point we are assuming has been inputted into that text box. So grab the text box values. So the first one is going to be server name, and that will be server text box. And then we want the value property. So value is referring to the value inside that particular text box. The next one will be our database name, and that will be our database. And then you can also just easily do this. And then we can also do our value just like that. So that's just an easy way using IntelliSense. And then we have our SQL query. That will be our query text box. And again, we just want that value. Okay, so now that we have the information that we have from our text box, we technically have all the information we need to build our connection string, right? Because we got our server name, we got our database name. And again, we're going to make an assumption, assuming that we want to do a trusted connection. So again, I am making a pretty big assumption, but hopefully what you can kind of tell from this is that you would just make a reference to the username text box and then the password text box. Now, just to keep my sanity, and it's very easy to write a incorrect connection string, I'm going to be copying it because I don't want it to break. I mean, I'm sure it's going to break, but at least I can no, it's not the connection string. So the connection string is just a connection string that we have to pass through in our connection object that we created up above, well, when we create it. And then obviously the connection string will change depending on the data source that you're connecting to. So part of it is if you don't know the connection string, you have to go and look it up. Now there's different resources out there to help you through the process of building your connection string. But in this example, we're going to be doing SQL. And so for the SQL database, at least for the OLEDB driver, for the SQL database, it's server, the name, the database name, and then they have this optional argument, which means trusted connection. And what this means is basically just use your Windows credentials. So that's just for you to be aware of. Okay, so from here, we can create a new connection object and a new command object. With the command object, it will do things like execute it, store the query and stuff like that. So we'll set our connection object equal to a new ADODB connection object, and then we will also do a command object. So this will be our ADODB command object. So again, that's kind of what's storing your query and then executing it and stuff like that. The connection is purely just for the connection to the database. We'll create a new connection. And so we'll say with our connection object and with tab in, there is a property called provider. And provider basically says what kind of driver you're going to be using. So I'm going to do the Microsoft Office OLEDB SQL. So this is just the Microsoft Office, is it Microsoft SQL OLEDB SQL driver, I believe. Don't quote me on that one, but I think the other one's the same. I know this is OLEDB, so this is just OLE, automation technology, database, SQL. So from here, our connection string is what we defined up above. So that's going to be our data source. And then finally, with our connection, after we pass through our connection string, we can open a new connection. Okay, so that's our new connection object. We can now create a command object. So, well, or more, we can attach our connection object to our command object. So attach our connection object to our command object. And so we'll take that command object and we'll call the active connection property and set that equal to our connection object. So that expects a connection object, and then you just set it. And so now what we're saying is, okay, this command object, it's going to be executing stuff. I want it to execute it against that connection we just attached to it. Okay, so from here, we can define the query string and the command text. So we'll take our command object and we'll do the command text. This is basically the query, and we'll set that equal to our SQL query. And then we will set our command type. So this is basically the type it is. In this case, we have it be a text. So it's just an SQL query string. So it's just text. And then from here, we can execute the query and get the column names. That's really just the fields though. So we're going to set our record set object equal to our command object after calling the execute method. So when you call the execute method, it executes that query, it gets all your data, it sends it back to us, and it sends it back as a record set object. So that's why I declare a record set object up here. It's a collection of records. And then from here, I also want my column names. That's going to be record set dot fields. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take this wonderful guy right here and, this wonderful guy right here, and we're going to write it to that that list view, so that query section, right? So write the results to the list view, and that's really just our query results. So with query results end with, let's get started. So first things first is we have to assume there might be old data there. So the first thing is, let's clear out the old data. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say column headers. We're going to call that clear method. So that will clear it out. And then there's list items. We want to clear that out as well. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's add column headers to our query result. So add the column names. So we're going to say for each column name in column names, next, tab in, we're going to say column headers. It's a collection. We're going to do add. There's an index. There's a key. There's a text. There's width, alignment, and icon. We're going to keep it really simple at this point. We're just going to give it a name. So we're going to take that field object, and it has a property called name. The name property is basically the name of that field. So at this point, all we're doing is we're just simply taking that field name and having it serve as a column header. That's all. Okay, so that adds the columns. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to loop through our record set, and we're going to start adding it to our particular result, or our query result. There's a big assumption though. We can't guarantee that there's always going to be data. So check to see if the record set is empty. So if record set end of field, then keep going. And then, well, we'll just put that right here. So if we're at the end of our record set, basically end of field means we don't have anywhere else to go. So if we're at the end of our field, that means basically there was nothing. Then we need to display a message. Display a message and say message box prompt equals the query was empty. Now it's a little bit more than that, but I'm just keeping it simple for right now. Buttons, so this is the type of message box. I want it to be VB information. And then finally, I want the title to be query status. So again, if it was empty, it would let them know. If that is the case, then I want to close that connection. So close the connection. And what that means is we're going to take our connection object and we're going to call the close method. And then we want to exit the sub. So exit the subroutine. So we'll just say exit sub. So again, if it was empty, that's fine. Just exit the sub and close your connection. That happens sometime. Okay, else, that means we basically have a record set that does have data in it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, with our record set, what do we want to do with it? What do we want to do with this record set that has all this data in it? Well, what we're going to say is keep going. So do until you reach the end of the field. Okay. So do until end of field. Now with that, we're going to then loop. So just keep going until you reach that end, or the last, row. What are we going to do? Well, we got to initialize a count. This will make more sense when, we're looping. Initialize a count. This will help determine whether to add a new row or column. And then so we'll say count equals 1. We're going to loop through each field, and we'll say for each field in dot field. So loop through each field in that record. Okay. Oh, hold on. I got to check my notes really quick because I want to make sure I indent things correctly. Okay. How should I frame this? So if it's the first field in our record set, it means we have the first column of a new row. So this is kind of how we're helping to determine if it's a new row. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to say if the count equals 1, it means we have a new row, okay? It'll make a little bit more sense when we're writing it. So what we're going to do is we're going to set our list item equal to our query results list items, add, there's some text, equals, and then it's going to be that field value. Okay? Again, it'll make sense in just a tiny bit, so bear with me really quickly. Otherwise, if it's not a new row, then add it as a list sub item. So we're going to say list item, list sub items dot add text colon equal field dot value. Let's take a step back and kind of just take a look at what's going on, because this is probably the most confusing part, and I want to make sure we kind of understand what's going on, right? What does this mean exactly, right? Let's take a second. Okay, so we're looping through each record in our record set, and we're going to keep doing that until we reach the end of our record set, right? With each record, we're going to loop through each field, okay? So for each field, if it's the first field, it means we're on a new row. So we're going to create a new list item object, which is basically a row in our list view. If it's not the first field, it means we're still on that current record, that current row. So we're going to take that existing list item and we're going to go to that list sub items collection and we're going to add it there. That's basically what this is all doing. So if field is the first one, we got a new row. Otherwise, we are on the same row. That's kind of how I like to think about it. Again, if you got to think about it differently, go for it. Won't even be offended. We got to increment our count. And so this will keep going until we go to the next record, and then it's going to be 1 again, and the whole process is going to start over. So that's basically what's kind of going on. Now, what we technically have to do is we actually have to manually go to the next record. So what we say is move to the next record set. So we say, move next. And so we call the move next method. That's basically what this is doing. Okay, so we've done that. Once we've done that, we can then close our connection object. So once we've populated everything, we can close it all out. So close the connection. And so what we'll do is take that connection object and we'll call the close method. And that's it. That's the code. It's not too crazy, hopefully. I mean, it's probably a little bit crazy, but I think honestly, this is probably the most confusing part out of all of it, because there's just that whole like, okay, I got to keep tabs on my count and stuff like that. So honestly, this is where I get most confused. I think we've done that before. Like we kind of understand the whole concept, like a connection object and stuff like that. It's really working with that particular list view where things can get a little bit complicated. So what we're going to do is we're going to test it out and see if it works. And I'll put it in our new workbook just to verify it all works, right? I doubt it's going to work the first time, but we can pray, right? All right, so we'll go here. I'll just double check. I got that. I think that's all good. Cool. So let's start populating some stuff into our wonderful database. So that looks good. Okay, we want it to come from my stock database. That's one of my ones with my TD Ameritrade price data and stuff like that, right? All right. So we'll put it in there. That's okay. It's technically supposed to be a little bit different. I thought I changed it. Hold on a second. Maybe I didn't. Okay. Well, moment of truth. Oh, jeez. See, it's always something. Let's take a look. See, this is the fun part about coding. It never works the way you think it's going to work. You think it works, and then it doesn't work. Query text box. Hey, I'm back. Sorry about that. I had to pause the video because I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on and why it was not working. And I still can't really give you a good answer. I got it working, but as for why it wasn't working, your guess is as good as mine. For whatever reason, it really did not like the fact that this was query text box. It didn't seem to like it. I don't know why, because I've literally copied all the other stuff exactly like the other one. So my workaround was I literally put a 2 at the end of it, and I just had this be 2. Now it seems to work fine. So literally, I just copy it like so. So this is what it was supposed to do. You copy your server, you copy your database, and you put your query in here. It looks all pretty, and then magically you get all this wonderful data back. You can even rearrange it. And so now we can see, okay, if I select it, it all looks good. And all right, so I want to put that over here, and maybe I want that a little bit closer. So, it's pretty nice, right? It makes it all super friendly and all sorts of cool stuff. And you can make your query a little bit more dynamic. Maybe you just want the next, the first 4. Okay, so then it shows the 4, or maybe I just want, what is it? ID, and I want close price. Maybe that's all I want. Okay, so that gives you my ID and close price. But the idea is that obviously it's supposed to be dynamic, and then you could choose a different database potentially and all that kind of fun stuff. Again, I think it's very odd that I have to change this. So I'm just really curious now, because it's going to drive me up the wall if I don't try it at least one more time. So we'll save it and we'll see what happens. Maybe it will work because, it likes making my life difficult. Okay, so we'll grab that. All right, put that in there. And then we'll put that in there. Yeah, okay. Oh, you know what? I guarantee it. It has to do... Oh. Wow. I'm really an idiot. I misspelt it. Wonderful. Well, that's always a fun story. Apparently I misspelt it. So now it should work. Let's put it in and see what we get. Oh, the joys of programming. Hopefully it doesn't work. Oh, it worked. God. All right, well, that was my bad. Sorry about that. Typos are fun. That's why you should use option explicit and not turn it off like I did. All right, so yeah, that kind of does it for this series. So hopefully you learned a couple different things with this particular topic. So, learning how to, work with the user form, adding that functionality component to your user form, and incorporating new controls that maybe you don't see by default, but you think they're pretty useful, and maybe you want to use them in your own particular user form. So, yeah, I think at this point, you got any questions, feel free to put them down in the comments below. Hopefully none of you make, a mistake like that. What I did was just misspell something and then spend 5 minutes trying to figure it out, but that's coding, so welcome to life. Other than that, thanks again for watching, everybody. We'll see you in the next video.